All right, we're a little late, but here we are, back to All Things Unexplained, and we are so pleased to have Dr. Loeb back with us again. But first, here's Larry.
All Things Unexplained, hosted by Dr. Mounts.
Let's face it, we were always ready to roll without him anyway.
CJ Derringer.
Ain't nobody perfect, right?
And Smitty Neebs.
I've never planned out hardly anything my whole life. I just freeball.
Featuring Cajun Man.
I'm just old nobody, somebody looking for somebody.
Hello, all of you beings out there in the universe. We are so excited to have you joining us today. We have Dr. Avi Loeb back on our show. We're so fortunate. We have had him on a few times before. If you're interested to hear about his background or his latest expedition, you can take a look at some of our previous podcasts. He is the head astrophysicist at Harvard University. He is working with the Galileo Project looking for extraterrestrial life. He is also the author of a new book coming out this August called Interstellar. We are so excited to dive into that book. We loved his previous book, Extraterrestrial. I know I read it hard copy. And Tim, you listened to it on Audible, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Just, doing dishes around the house, doing laundry, driving to the grocery store. I turn Extraterrestrial on. And to me, Audible, it's a great way to listen to books. They also have podcast musics and specials that are only available on Audible. And we cannot wait to listen to Interstellar.
Yes, we cannot wait. And in fact, everybody can listen to Interstellar. We have partnered with Audible to give our listeners a free trial. You can head to audibletrial.com/UFO to get your free trial. Again, that's audibletrial.com/UFO. And speaking of UFOs, Dr. Avi Loeb had the expedition of a lifetime at the Pacific Ocean in Papua New Guinea, looking for signs of extraterrestrial life. Dr. Loeb, what percentage chance do you give it that you have indeed uncovered extraterrestrial or non-human technology?
It's a possibility. And the reason I say that is, first, this is the first object that came from outside the solar system that the humans noticed. And that was based on US government sensors, primarily satellites that discovered this fireball back in 2014, January 8th, over the Pacific Ocean. And what made this meteor different than other meteors is that the object was moving very fast. In fact, not only that it was not bound to the sun, but outside the solar system, if you were to extrapolate, the speed was 60 kilometers per second, which is faster than 95% of all stars in the vicinity of the sun. And moreover, this object only disintegrated in the lower atmosphere of the Earth, where the air density is very high. So it had material strength that allowed it to sustain the extreme stress of the atmosphere. And that material strength was tougher than all space rocks that NASA cataloged over the past decade. So if you think about it, an object that has material strength above even iron meteorites that make 5% of all space rocks and that moves very fast could potentially be a spacecraft. Like imagine Voyager that will collide with an exoplanet in 1 billion years and would burn up in the atmosphere of that planet as a meteor. That's what we are talking about. And to find out, this is not a hypothetical question. We can go out there to the site of the meteor and find any leftovers from it. And that's what we did in this expedition. It cost $1.5 million. And I had a funder that came forward and said, you have the money. His name is Charles Hoskinson. And we hired a ship that was fittingly called Silver Star. We built a sled that had magnets on both sides, and we dragged it on the ocean floor with a cable. The depth of the ocean is 2 kilometers. And what we found are tiny spheres, basically metallic marbles that were attracted to the magnets. Together with the most abundant constituent down there was volcanic ash, basically black powder. You can see it in a vial that I'm holding here in my hand. This is from the last run. It basically, black powder is most of the stuff that we collected. We scraped it off the magnets and put it in vials, and then dried it up, used the mesh to filter out the tiny particles that are volcanic in origin from Earth. And then we were left with some bigger particles above the size of 1/4 of a millimeter. And we put them under the microscope. And lo and behold, we found these beautiful metallic marbles that are very distinct relative to their environment. And they represent the molten droplets from the surface of the object when it was exposed to the extreme heat from the fireball, from the friction of the object with the air. The amount of energy released was a few percent of the Hiroshima atomic bomb energy. So that was deposited into 500 kilograms of material and resulted in melting. And we found, amazingly enough, millimeter-sized droplets that fell off the object. And we had to survey a region that was 10 kilometers in size and 2 kilometers deep to find those. And we found more than 50. In fact, my student yesterday found another one. And so it's quite remarkable in terms of a scientific accomplishment. And, people may say, oh, maybe these things are everywhere, like maybe you didn't find anything. It has nothing to do with the meteor. Well, we went to other locations, which were, tens of kilometers away from the meteor site. And we didn't find many spherules there. Just next to the expected path of the meteor, we found in one line that we took, with the sled, we found 11 of them. When we went far away, at most one. So it's clearly a concentration associated with the meteor, and we are now studying those spherules. That's the way they are called, these marbles. We're studying their composition in 3 laboratories. One is at Harvard University, another one at UC Berkeley, and the third one at the Bruker Corporation in Germany.
So I was just reading some of your articles the other day, which can be found at Avi-Loeb, that's Loeb, .medium.com. So Avi-Loeb.medium.com. And you were talking about how these were being FedExed, how you were having to FedEx these amazing things that you found. I mean, what level of fear was in your stomach as you were waiting for these to arrive?
Yeah, so I had to decide whether to carry them in my suitcase or to send them by FedEx. And I decided that it's safer to send them by FedEx because suitcases are lost very often. It was funny because it took a few days for FedEx to deliver. And actually, the delivery person almost left. He didn't actually even ring the bell. He just knocked very politely on the door and wanted to take it back. And I ran after him and said, please give it to me. And I realized that it took a few days for FedEx to deliver, but this material was delivered to Earth probably after a few billion years of a very long journey from a distant location. So if you think about it, it's interstellar delivery services that sometimes take billions of years. And the few extra days of delay were not much of a worry. I also had to send some material to Germany and declare to FedEx what the content of the package is. Yeah. And I said sand. And then I had to declare the value of it. And I said no commercial value. Of course, it has huge intellectual value.
Yeah, scary. I think I would have been a nervous wreck waiting for those to be delivered. So tell us what the next steps are and what we might be able to ascertain in terms of what you've found.
Yeah, so that's the most important step. And of course, many people jump into conclusions prematurely. And what we are doing is using really the best instruments that the scientific world has to offer. And that includes a scanning electron microscope, basically getting images of those spherules. And already on the first day that we came back, I passed through UC Berkeley and looked at one of those images. And it was amazing because we could see a spherule as a sphere inside of which we find smaller spheres, inside of which you find even smaller spheres. So it's sort of like Russian dolls. The idea is that the first spheres to solidify have only a size of a few hundred atoms, and they solidify very quickly, but then they get engulfed by molten iron, bigger droplets that glue them together, and then even bigger droplets that glue those together. So you end up in sort of a hierarchy of spheres, which is really beautiful. I don't know if it was discussed much in the literature, but we saw it in state-of-the-art electron microscope. We also used a mass spectrometer. After ablating some of the material from a spheral, we could analyze what elements and isotopes, radioactive isotopes, are making it. That's important for two reasons. One, we can compare the composition to solar system materials and see whether we have some elements that have a very different abundance. Just imagine a computer screen or a semiconductor melted into droplets. It would have very different composition of rare elements compared to what you find in nature, because we concentrate those rare elements in a semiconductor. And so you could tell a technological device just based on composition in principle. And then the radioactive isotopes, they can serve as a clock, because some of them are unstable and they have a half-life, a certain lifespan. And if you see them, you know that the duration of the journey was shorter than their lifespan. And depending on how many of them you see relative to their decay products, you can basically clock the duration of the journey. You can tell how long it was. And that's what we hope to do. And in fact, I looked at two of the spherules that came from the meteor path, and they seem to be older than the solar system. We are still analyzing that data. But we are writing a scientific paper that will hopefully within a month be submitted for publication, in which we will detail the preliminary results from the analysis. And that's the way science is done. It's not jumping into conclusions just based on your belief. It's analyzing and first of all collecting the evidence. Even though it sounds really straightforward and trivial and simple, a colleague of mine approached me a week before we went to the expedition and said, many of us believe that this is a waste of your time, a waste of money. Why would you do that? And I said, I'm not asking you to do anything. You can just sit back. I'm doing the heavy lifting. You sit back and relax. And when I come back, if I don't bring anything back, you can say, that's what I thought. And by the way, I'm not using any of the money that you are now dedicating to dark matter research. This is money that was provided to the expedition and was not taken away from any other science. In fact, it's extra money for science. So it's a win-win situation where I'm just going to collect evidence and let's see if I find anything. If I will not search, obviously I will not find anything. And on the day that I came back, there was a paper published in the Astrophysical Journal by some astronomers who said that actually the government must have been wrong in the data they provided for the speed of this meteor, because we used the model for stony meteorites of the solar system, and it couldn't fit that data. Therefore, the data must be wrong. And, that's a presumptuous approach, because I was taught that if your model doesn't fit data, you don't say the data is wrong. You try to revise the model, which is pretty much what I argue, that the material strength of this object was different from stony meteorites. Right. But they basically argued this object cannot be made of iron, while I was holding in my hands the materials from this meteor that were primarily iron, based on the X-ray fluorescence analyzer on the ship. So, and also for them to claim the US government is wrong by a factor of a few, that the speed is smaller by a factor of a few than it was measured, is a very bold claim, because the US Space Command just a year ago came with an official letter to NASA saying we are confident at the 99.999% that the velocity measurement was correct and that this object came from outside the solar system. It was interstellar. And I sleep better at night, because now that we went to that place, that the government talked about. We found the spherules from the meteor. I know that the government sensors are to be trusted. These are sensors being used to monitor ballistic missiles that are headed towards the US. And obviously, if the government was wrong by a factor of 3 on each measurement, they could say, oh, no, this missile goes to Mexico while it goes to actually Washington, D.C., right? So for astronomers to claim that the government does not know what they're doing is a very bold claim. That's what they claim, just so that their model would fit the data. And I would bring a sense of modesty to science. We shouldn't be so arrogant as to say, if what we can imagine does not fit the data must be wrong. Because we already know that, for example, the data on the Milky Way galaxy suggests matter that we've never found in the solar system. We call it dark matter. That's 83% of the matter in the universe. And just imagine, most cosmologists write papers on the dark matter. That's a major area of research. Imagine cosmologists saying, oh, the data that we are trying to interpret cannot be fitted with material we find in the solar system, therefore the data must be wrong. That is completely contrary to the way we do cosmology nowadays.
Yes, it's a very, very exciting time in astrophysics, and to be looking for extraterrestrial life on our planet, or extraterrestrial evidence, I should say, on our planet is very exciting. You've sort of turned into a maverick astrophysicist these days, it seems, but we really love that the work that you're doing, and appreciate that you're pushing the envelope and that you're looking for things that others aren't looking for, and that you have now sparked interest in the private sector to secure funds to go and do this is really phenomenal. And I think
I should mention also something that you may not know, that in fact it inspires artists, a number of them. Like a couple of days ago, there was a sculptor who decided to dedicate a sculpture bigger than a person to the research I'm doing. So he's working on that. And then a playwright from Los Angeles just finished a play that he hopes will be featured on Broadway about my scientific career. And
wow.
A songwriter who won 3 Grammys, 4 Oscars, 3 Emmys, decided to write a song about my research. There is a filming crew that is making a documentary with a very large budget about the research. And of course, the book that is coming up. So altogether, there is a lot of artistic interest. So I think it inspires a lot of people out there. And when I wrote the diary reports on medium.com, there were millions of people around the world who read them. And they said that it gives them a new sense of how science is being done, because what they usually see are scientists at press conferences lecturing the public about the final findings. Whereas the way science is done is very different. It's by iterations. Sometimes you make the wrong assumptions, and then you collect more evidence to figure out the truth. It's like a detective story. Mm-hmm. It has twists and turns. So they don't see that. The public doesn't see that. And when I was writing these diary reports, they could see how it's done. And so they very much appreciate it. I think science, the lesson is that science can be exciting as long as it resonates with the public's interest. And the second lesson is science cannot be diminished by the negative undertones of social media or of academic jealousy.
Absolutely, yes. And Tim, you've got a PowerPoint, right, from the actual expedition, speaking of film crews and documentaries.
Oh, indeed. And we're so pleased to have Dr. Avi Loeb back with us again. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Loeb. This will be a great time to mention we have partnered with Audible, and you can pre-order Dr. Loeb's next book, Interstellar, for free right now. All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/UFO. And in Dr. Loeb's previous book, Extraterrestrial, which I listened to on Audible, Dr. Loeb hypothesized about the possibility of ancient relics from previous technologically advanced cosmic societies or civilizations. And he may very well have found the evidence for it now on his latest expedition. So head to audibletrial.com/UFO, and you can download or pre-order a copy of his next book, Interstellar, which we are very much looking forward to. And Dr. Loeb, I've got a few slides here, and I think this is great because CJ and I are both, amazed at the science of this all, and we love following your science. And this is just a part of it. And I really liked how apparently you did a lot of running on the expedition.
Right. Well, I jog every morning at sunrise, and I didn't give up on that on the deck. But after the first day, I realized that I'm actually running slower than usual. I was wondering whether I'm tired. And then the next day, I was running faster than usual. And that led me to realize that I'm actually jogging on a platform. And when I use my workout app on my watch, it's using GPS, and the GPS system measures the speed of the boat because I'm actually running on the platform. So it took me a while to recognize the fact that I cannot measure reliably the way my speed. But there was also a filming crew on the ship, and they decided to film me jogging at sunrise one morning. And then the director asked me, "It looks like you're running. Are you running away from something or towards something?" And I said, both. I'm running away from some of my colleagues who prefer to have opinions without seeking evidence, and I'm running towards a higher intelligence in interstellar space.
Love that.
And here is one of the spheres that you collected, I believe.
Right. These are beautiful metallic marbles. My daughter asked if I can give her one so that to put on a necklace. And I said, no, these are tiny, 0.5 millimeter. You can't thread them. And the one thing is, we found also some biological spheres, but they are easy to basically crash with tweezers. And the metallic marbles are really tough. They're made mostly of iron. And here you see one of them. And the reason they're spherical is similar that the droplets of rain are roughly spherical. There is surface tension when the iron melted that kept it spherical. But we did see some examples of mergers where multiple spheres came together and then solidified before they had a chance to become spherical after the merger. And I did a calculation that indicates that's reasonable if the collision of the droplets occurs within tens of meters from the explosion. And as I said before, we also looked at the internal structure, and many of them have spheres inside spheres, which means that close to the explosion, you have a lot of droplets colliding with each other.
So
Right.
for those that are listening and not watching on our podcast, this particular sphere has almost the colors, if I'm seeing it correctly, of Earth, as if you were looking at planet Earth from above. I'm seeing some deep blue
Really
and some
does.
green.
Yeah, there was even one that looked like half a sphere that was damaged, and I called it an alien emoji. Here it is.
This is my favorite. And for those listening on podcast platforms such as Audible
Wow.
or Amazon or Spotify or Apple, this reminds me so much of the infamous crystal skulls, but it's not crystal, and it looks like what you might, I don't know, think of as an alien skull.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
But it's mostly iron, and there are some additional elements, including elements all the way to uranium. And so we are now analyzing it and trying to figure out what we can learn from the composition. But of course, you can also think of these spherules as rose petals that romantically lead us to our partner. And by partner, I mean a big piece of the meteor that may lie somewhere on the ocean floor. We now know where to search for that with a sonar, and that could be the focus of a future expedition.
Right. And how confident are you, Dr. Loeb, that a lot of what you found is not pollution?
These pieces lay on the ocean floor for almost a decade. So the surface of them could have been easily contaminated by some background materials that attach to them, including biological material. But we are trying to look deeper than the skin of these spherules. Now, there could be some particles that came from human activities. I mean, we did see some shards of iron on the ocean floor, but you can tell the difference if, for example, you date the material age and you figure out that it's older than the solar system. So irrespective of what humans do, they always use materials from the solar system. And as a result, when you look at the abundance of uranium and lead, you find that they give you, as cosmic clocks, they give you the age of the solar system. But if something came from far away outside the solar system, it could have a different age. It could also have different abundance of rare elements. And rare elements are produced either in supernova explosions or in collisions of neutron stars. And if an object comes from a very different environment, it would have been perhaps closer to a collision of neutron stars, or the supernova that enriched it had a star, progenitor star, of a different mass than the one that enriched the solar system. So in principle, we can tell the difference.
Right. That's a great point, Dr. Loeb. And now we're looking at a photo of Dr. Loeb on the deck, I suppose, of the expedition craft that they were used to search for these spheres and other evidence. Now, Dr. Loeb, I have to say that while I was looking at these photos of you on this really, historic expedition for science, I couldn't help but think of a recent story in the news about another ocean expedition to look at the Titanic. And this was the Ocean Gate Titan submersible with CEO Stockton Rush on board that tragically imploded on the way down. And I just wondered, do you have any thoughts on that situation? Because your expedition does remind me, when I see these pictures, I can't help but think of that.
Yeah, so, the difference is that I asked Rob McCallum to coordinate my expedition. He's the world expert in ocean expeditions. And as it turns out, in the middle of our expedition, he was asked to comment on Ocean Gate by the BBC, by many other outlets, because he actually, in 2019, approached the CEO of that company and told them that it's unsafe. He is a very reliable person, and the fact that he was on my team made our expedition a success. But with respect to Ocean Gate, I should say that he had the insight that they used materials that were not tested well enough, and that they took risks that he thought are unsafe, and he put it in writing, in letters to them, to not do it. So in retrospect, he is a very reliable person. And, there were many failure points of our expedition where things would not have worked the way we wanted them to work. For example, we had the sled, and the first challenge was to keep it on the ocean floor. And it took us a couple of days because at first the cable was pulling it up, and it was lifted. The sled was lifted like a kite above the ocean floor. And then the engineers and the professionals we had, exceptional people on the team, managed to find a way to go with the ocean currents and keep it on the floor. And then the fact that the sled worked the way we wanted it, that it collected the materials and performed the way we needed it to perform. And then we had the relevant tools on the ship to separate those spherules, select them with tweezers, and then look at them through microscope and figure out their composition using the X-ray analyzer. That all worked amazingly well, and there were people along the way that enabled those things to work. So it's really a team effort, and I'm very fortunate. I was worried that that we will not find anything. So it looks like Rob brought bottles of champagne on the ship, and we celebrated at the end the success of the mission. But I asked him, why did you bring champagne? It was not obvious at all that we would be successful, to me at least. And he said, I'm an optimist. And my lesson from that is that sometimes life is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell yourself that you might succeed, you actually could make it. If you tell yourself there is no chance, there is no point in going there, obviously you will not find anything.
Right. And I believe we're looking at a picture now of Dr. Loeb on deck with the sled that you use to collect evidence from the floor. Now, did you have any guidelines? Yeah.
So let me explain what we are looking at. So what you see is the front of the sled. So there are these wheels that are supposed to slide over the ocean floor as it moves forward, as it's dragged by a cable connected to the ship. You can see the cable actually on the left side going up. That's supposed to drag it. That's after the sled finished its run. So we are now trying to collect all the materials from the magnets. These are neodymium magnets. They are sort of circular and attached with screws to the black rubber that you can see there. And what you are seeing is a person using a water hose and a vacuum cleaner.
Vac.
Yeah, exactly. So we found that to be a very effective way of collecting everything. So we basically use the water to clear the magnets, and then the vacuum cleaner was sucking everything, including the water, but all the volcanic ash and all the spherules as well embedded with it into the vacuum cleaner bucket. And then we took it from there and removed the water, eventually dried up the sample, and then used the mesh to filter out the black ash, the volcanic particles that are extremely small, less than a tenth of a millimeter, and then look at the rest through a microscope. And every now and then we would notice something like this. So here you see actually a merger of two spheres, and you can see that they solidified before they had a chance to become circular again. So that shows that mergers do take place. And then, there are basically different types of iron droplets. And most of them were found along the meteor path. And we narrowed down the likely path of the meteor using data from a seismometer in Manus Island of Papua New Guinea. There is a Navy base, and there is a seismometer there, and it recorded the blast wave, the sound wave from the explosion. And since the sound speed is much smaller than the speed of light, we can infer the time delay, the time that it took the sound to reach the seismometer from the explosion, and from that figure out the distance, knowing the speed of sound. And that allowed us to narrow down the path of the meteor, know where it was, and we found most of the spherules there. And this is a chart that is actually also behind me right now.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, I
love this picture.
Yeah, so it's behind me, and you can see it just to my right side, your left. And it basically counts spherules as they come. And as you see, run 8 had 11, actually, it turns out by now, spherules, which is the most prolific among all runs. And it went just on the likely meteor path. So in a way, that basically suggests the government is right. The government has good sensors. They gave us the correct location. And this was a meteor of the type that they described. And it's made mostly of iron, unlike the characteristics described in the paper that was just published last week in the Astrophysical Journal by those astronomers who claim the government is wrong. And, I have trust that the government does its best, and especially when they go over the data multiple times and issue a formal letter, you should pay attention to that and not dismiss it.
And we're essentially looking at a classic whiteboard with dry erase tally marks of the spherules as they collect them, which CJ and I have both been in education. It just totally reminded me of using the dry erase markers for various things in education. So I thought, wow, even on a search for extraterrestrial evidence here, we see kind of the same stuff in use, which is
that was my idea, to tally all of these. And the distant runs had at most one or so spherules. And here you see again the vacuum cleaner on the left being used. We had T-shirts. You can see the person on the left wearing them, Ryan Weed, who has a laboratory at UC Berkeley. And the T-shirt on the back says Interstellar Expedition Team. And
yes.
all of us got those T-shirts. And you can see a group photo here with these shirts. And in the front, it's the Galileo project. In the back, what I just mentioned. And we had a lot of people, including representatives from Papua New Guinea. We have a collaboration, an ongoing collaboration with the University of Technology in Papua New Guinea. Department chair from there is coming to visit me and participate in the analysis in the coming weeks. So we are very pleased to have a professional from Papua New Guinea as part of the project. He will be on our paper. And we established an agreement with the University of Technology in Papua New Guinea in terms of the analysis and research that we are doing.
Which is great. And I don't think we'll have time to get into that, but I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm so happy to know it all worked out, because it was in the news about some potential conflict with certain representatives from Papua New Guinea.
Well, we worked with officials for more than 8 months. Of course, there were people that were out of the loop, that were not aware of these relationships. But the relationship with the University of Technology in Papua New Guinea was established a few months ago. So this has been ongoing for 8 months, and we have been in contact with authorities, and they knew about this expedition. It's just that some other people were not aware of these contacts.
Right, and it's just great that you kept moving forward and got to do the science. And here's Dr. Loeb on the deck again with some of the other folks here in their matching T-shirts, which is great. Oh, and you mentioned the spherules and the tweezers. So this is a great picture. We're looking at a close-up of a really shiny, metallic-looking spherule being held by tweezers.
Right, and the key test of whether it's biological or not would be to press the hands of the tweezers, and biological spheres would crash under the pressure. And of course, a better test is to check the composition. So just to give you an example for how science goes, in one of the runs, the early runs, the sled came back with white paint all over it. Sort of like a Jackson Pollock painting. And it occurred to me that the most likely explanation is that there was a sailor on some boat some time ago that threw a bucket of paint and, to the ocean floor, white paint, and we just bumped into it with a sled.
Naughty of that sailor.
So I took my finger and took some swiped the paint and put it in a vial, and we analyzed the composition, and then we realized, it's actually biological based on the composition. It's not the human-made paint, and we checked online, and indeed there is this gooey material that sits on the ocean floor that you can run into that would paint your sled white if you do that. So here's an example of how science works. You see something really surprising. You're thinking about the most likely possibility. Turns out to be wrong. You figure it out with more evidence, and you move on. That's the way science is done. And why, there shouldn't be any bad feelings about it. It's nothing about me. It's nothing about us thinking about the wrong hypothesis, because at the end of the day, we learn something new. That's the way kids behave. They learn about the world by trial and error, by experiencing things. The problem is adults that are not willing to collect data, that have opinions on everything, and that ridicule the search for evidence on social media. That's really the problem.
It's definitely how kids behave. And let me tell you, my shop vac is out all the time as well. I just don't think I'm finding anything nearly as exciting as you have on your expedition.
Well, if it was a Jackson Pollock painting, I would hang it in my living room.
Hey, you've got some pretty great stuff hanging there right now. So, and here we see, somebody about to set out on a smaller craft. And here's a close-up of one of these spherules. And Dr. Loeb, I have to say, I read a lot about some of your colleagues that do believe a lot of this could potentially be pollution. But when I look at these things, like, I don't see pollution. That's not what my brain says. It literally seems like I'm looking at something alien that I don't have an explanation for.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about pollution, it will not target specifically the meteor path. Okay, the meteor path was localized using the seismometer data to within a kilometer across a line of 10 kilometers length. And when we went away to distances of several tens of kilometers away from that path, we didn't find spheres. We didn't see them. Okay, so you have to explain, if it's pollution, why would anyone go exactly to the meteor path that we localized a couple of months before the expedition? That was the time that we localized it. Someone would go there and plant sub-millimeter spherules that were molten and have some evidence of, being on the floor for a long time. Why would anyone go there and put them there? And it's 2 kilometers deep. So unless one of these people did it themselves, I mean, also they would never be able to get it to the right place because of ocean currents. And so, my point is, let's just look at the evidence and the data rather than always try to debunk or have a negative assessment of whatever is being done. And these people that talk about it, they haven't seen the material. They don't know of the data that we have, because we are in the process of writing the paper. So when my paper comes out, they can do whatever they want in terms of interpreting it. But doing it prematurely just shows you that they have an ulterior motive. Because if they were open-minded, they would not express an opinion until they have access to the data through the scientific paper that we are about to write.
That's
and when
exactly
that paper
right.
does come out, Dr. Loeb, where's the best place for people to find it?
Usually papers are posted on the archive. It's called, it's labeled ARXIV, and it has different subjects in it, one of which is astrophysics. So that's where we put the preprints usually for public consumption. But also at the same time that we post it there, I will talk about it on medium.com. So if you want to get the information in a more digestible way, I will have it there.
Perfect. That's where I'll go.
So what you see here is that's the filming crew, what you saw. And these are so these are the vials with the spherules. And, you can think of the spherules as babies that we delivered in this expedition. Mm-hmm. And just like looking at the delivery room where you see the babies sleeping in their beds, here you see those spherules in the vials that serve as their beds within the delivery room, which is basically a plastic container that keeps all these vials. And there is a process that we went through. Here what you see is the filming crew with the director on the right, the cameraman in the center, and the soundman on the left. They were basically filming me jogging in the morning. And they used also a drone to film it from a distance. And they kept asking me to keep running, 3 times longer than I usually do. So for an hour and a half with my legs up, because they want better shots. And I was completely exhausted after that. Because it was of the order of 10 miles, basically, the amount of distance, if I were to run on dry land. So, but that was like 5 a.m. My sleeping habits on the ship were very sporadic. So I would sleep in a few hour segments, because we had to come out every time the sled would be brought to the deck. And I was always out trying to scrape the magnets and bring the materials and make sure that everything is attended to. So I would sleep in the conference room on the sofa for a few hours at a time, and also write the essays. That took a lot of time and a lot of effort. But altogether, it was an exhausting but very pleasing experience. The most exciting few weeks of my scientific career. And the dust did not settle as of yet. Once I came back, there were back-to-back interviews that I had I was invited to, and 12 in a typical day. Today I have 8, and the amount of items on the internet about my work grew by a factor of 10.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yes.
Yeah, so it basically exploded. I'm just trying to keep my message out that science can be exciting and that we are following the evidence, but it's not easy because a lot of people try to twist it one way or another.
Right. And I have to say that looking at this documentary crew filming you running, Dr. Loeb, CJ and I are both in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, home of the University of North Carolina, former home of Michael Jordan. And my son is fascinated by Air Jordans. And I can't help but think that he may have himself a pair of Air Loebs soon. So, and you did not, by the way, go unscathed on this expedition. I did read where you did have a fall on one of your runs.
Oh yeah, I was running up the stairs one day and bumped into the stairs, so I had the bruise. But I mentioned at an event in Zurich to the CEO of a sports company that I jog every morning, and he sent me a pair of shoes. It's one of the best in the world, actually. A pair of shoes of $200 for me to use. Of course, there are better shoes. I'm sure Michael Jordan probably has better shoes. It's not so much about the shoes. I really like lightweight sport shoes, but I keep a very simple lifestyle because I don't really care how much money I make at this point. If it's beyond a certain level that allows me to support my family, everything goes to my daughters. I eat the same amount of chocolates. I jog every morning. And I really pay attention to substance and not how many likes I get. So that keeps me alive. That keeps me also focused on the important things.
Hey, chocolate is plant-based. So
the chocolate is mostly dark with very little sugar. Yes, I get about 900 calories out of that every day.
And this is our last slide. Oh, 900 calories out of chocolate. Hello.
Yeah, half of my diet is chocolate.
Oh, man, mine too, but not for good reasons.
What you see here is the sunset after we had a champagne toast. And the person next to me is Art Wright. And his name is significant in 2 ways. First, he knows the art of navigating. He was the party chief on this expedition. So he really knows the art of doing it. That's why the first name, Art, makes a lot of sense. And the second name, Wright, also makes a lot of sense. He was always right. And he's always successful in all of his expeditions in the past. He was the commander of a destroyer during the Vietnam War. So he's like in his middle 80s, much older than I am. And here we're looking at the sunset from the deck after we realized that it was a successful mission. And we were talking about the next expedition and what to do in it. And I really enjoyed his company because he was very wise and sincere. At one point, I was typing an essay, and he came behind me and looked over my shoulder. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I just want to make sure that you are the actual writer because I see all your essays, and my family keeps telling me that they are reading the essays. And I wanted to make sure that there is no ghost writer, that nobody else writes it for you." And I said, "What do you mean? I'm just a very simple person. What you see is what you get." And he said, "One thing I know for sure, you are not a simple person."
Well, you are a very talented writer. I mean,
yes,
you are able to blend science and poetry very well. Philosophy as well. It looks like you two are looking out to the future, which is amazing. And we are so excited to learn what you have to share with us in the future.
Yes. And Dr. Loeb, this photo, and it's one of my favorites, and it's our last photo on the slideshow. It reminded me of one of my favorite movies, Jaws. Have you ever seen Jaws?
Oh, actually, the filming crew filmed me in Martha's Vineyard, where Jaws was filmed, and there is a famous bridge there, and they wanted me to jog over that bridge. And once again, they kept me running for 2 hours, and they filmed me running there, and they also filmed this scene that you're seeing. This photo was taken by the director of that documentary, and yes, so it's not by chance. The other thing they did was realize that some people may be inspired by Indiana Jones, because I'm a scientist seeking some treasures. Okay, and so they filmed my last class at Harvard, and in that class, I asked the students, if we find a technological gadget and it has buttons on it, should we press a button? And half of the class said, no way, it would be very dangerous. Another half said, of course, we want you to press a button because it will be very exciting. And then one student asked me, what would I do? And I said, I will first examine the object in a laboratory before engaging with it.
And then pay somebody else to press the button. That's what I'd do.
If you want, I'm happy to give you that authority, but you will take all responsibility.
Well, Dr. Loeb, you know, one of my favorite scenes from Jaws, and Jaws to me is not really a movie about the shark. It's a movie about the small group of people that set out on their adventure. That's what the movie's about. And one of my favorite scenes, they're just sitting around, they're comparing, you know, scar stories about how they got different scars on their body, and they break into song and such. Did you have any such, you know, moments like that on this expedition that just kind of had nothing to do with the search?
Oh, no, because this is my first time on a ship. So I'm sort of a virgin in that experience. Of course, the other people have a lot of stories and they told me about it, but I could not share any of mine. I do have other stories. You know, I parachuted when I was 18 years old as part of my military service, and I drove tanks. I did a lot of things that are far out there. You know, when I trained with paratroopers, I slept 7 hours a week. So there is a long life that I lived, but it never included anything on the ocean. And this was my first. And I would say it's very thrilling. And, you know, now we know that we can learn about what lies outside the solar system, not just by looking through telescopes, but by using microscopes. It's a completely new way to think about it. And the other thing is, we might get information about what is in interstellar space from the bottom of the ocean before we get it from Washington, D.C., from the U.S. government.
I've no doubt about that.
I feel like with all that you have done and all that you have left to do, we will have many, many more books and stories and documentaries about Dr. Avi Loeb. Once again, for those of you that are interested in pre-ordering Dr. Loeb's upcoming book, Interstellar, which comes out in August, you can use our free trial at audibletrial.com/UFO, or you can check out Extraterrestrial, which is already out, with thousands of other titles, of course. And we'll look forward to the next one, because I know that Interstellar is not the last book that you will be publishing. I'm certain there will be many more stories to come. And we're so thankful that you have come here to share with us your adventures and your discoveries, and we can't wait to find out what's next.
It was a real pleasure, and thanks for hosting me. And I look forward to bringing more information to light.
Wonderful. We hope you'll come and share that information with us on our show again.
Thanks.
All right, Tim, any last minute topics, last minute things?
Well, maybe we could just close with this, Dr. Loeb, if that's okay. There's a lot of stuff in the UFO world in the news lately, a lot, from whistleblowers like David Grush to politicians that are about to hold new UFO hearings. Marco Rubio, Tim Burchett, among others, have said some really jaw-dropping statements regarding UFOs and UAPs. And to close us out, what I would love to know from you is, how does this search for extraterrestrial technology that you have just embarked on, how does that fit into this really complicated picture that we have being played out in the media right now regarding UFOs and UAPs?
Yeah, it could be connected if indeed the government has data or information or materials that, as David Grosh was reporting about, then of course we would like to know about them. I haven't seen those materials. David Grosh did not see them. He just heard people talk about them and saw documents that discuss them. And actually, as of last night, there was a report about Chuck Schumer coming up with a legislation that would establish a group of people that would ask government to reveal the information it has on UAP or UFOs. You can check it out in the news. It just came out last night. And of course, if the government comes forward with information that was previously withheld under the veil of national security that we didn't see before, and they say actually over the past few decades we collected materials, we collected evidence that indicates something from outside of this earth, that would be remarkable. And for me, it would be a validation that what I'm talking about is not imaginative. It is not imaginary or speculative. And irrespective of what the government does, I'm pursuing it as a scientist because such knowledge about interstellar space has nothing to do with national security. Because anything coming from far away does not adhere to national borders. Okay, so we should share that information with all humans. And that's my hope by pursuing my scientific research.
Right. And, you know, you're definitely not doing this work in a vacuum. I feel like there's so much going on. We can't help but feel like it's building towards something. I don't know what that is, but it's building towards something. And this, none of it is in a vacuum. We're a little, we're a little skeptical of the Chuck Schumer situation because there's been a lot of reports of private companies conducting reverse engineering research. And of course, those private companies would not be prone to release anything just because you ordered the government to.
What was mentioned in the reports is that now with this legislation, the government will ask those companies for the materials back. That's what was mentioned. I should say also that I'm leading the Galileo project, which is broader than just this expedition. And we built already a functioning observatory at Harvard University that is collecting data 24/7 from one location. But we have plans for 5 copies of it that we will place in various locations. And I hope that in the coming year or two, we will bring clarity to this subject. But also perhaps this work, the scientific work, will motivate the government to come back to come out with the information that they have, because they collected it over many more years. And while they were serving the sky out of national security incentives, they saw things that they didn't expect. And it would be really remarkable if they were to share it with us. And of course, I cannot comment on anything that I haven't seen. So I'm waiting for that to happen, but at the same time, pursuing the same goal of letting the public be aware of what is out there using the scientific method.
Right. And there is one other thing I'd like to have your thought on, Dr. Loeb, regarding David Rush, the recent UFO whistleblower. And this is a direct extension of your work. If you are uncovering technology from a cosmic civilization, well, David Rush, he refused to use the terms alien or extraterrestrial. He would only use the terms such as non-human intelligence because, along with following the science, he said, well, we just don't have the evidence that such entities came from another area in space or the universe or the cosmos. They could perhaps have come from another dimension here above us or beneath us, however you want to look at it, or beneath our own oceans, for example.
Well, he speaks out of ignorance because he's not familiar with physics the way we know it, but we don't have any evidence for additional dimensions of space, for example. But the other thing is, in the case of the meteor, we saw it coming. Okay, so we know that it came from outside the solar system based on its speed, using the laws of physics. So it's true that if you just find some materials on the ground, you don't know where they came from. That's true. But what I'm saying is there is also an opportunity to look at interstellar objects, either colliding with Earth or passing near Earth. And for every meteor that strikes the Earth, like this IM-1, the first interstellar meteor, there are 1 million of them right now within the orbit of the Earth around the sun. 1 million objects, just like this meteor. They just don't collide with Earth because Earth has a very small cross-sectional area. So you can imagine a program where we would survey the region around the sun and look for such objects and check whether any of them is technological. And that's a much better approach to figure out that it came from somewhere else.
Well, we're certainly glad that you're taking the opportunities to find out more and to dig deeper. So thank you for all that you do. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to our listeners who have tuned in. We hope that you will continue to follow us at All Things Unexplained, and go ahead and head on over to Avi Loeb's website, which is avi-loeb.medium.com, to follow along with all of his research. We hope everybody stays happy, stays strange, and listens to All Things Unexplained. Until next time, thank you for joining us, Dr. Loeb.
Thanks for having me.
That's right. Good night, everybody. Or good day.
Good night. Wow.
It could be nighttime. See you, everybody.
It's a short day